The studio was buzzing with anticipation, the crowd murmured as they waited for the next question. The atmosphere was thick with political tension, the kind that had become all too familiar. Whenever Donald Trump stepped onto a stage, whether you loved him or hated him, one thing was certain: he knew how to command attention. The moderator nodded toward the audience, signaling the next question. A single mother, a frail-looking woman in her early 30s, slowly stood up. She clutched the microphone with both hands, her knuckles turning white. She inhaled sharply, as if she was about to step into a battlefield. Trump leaned forwards lightly, his expression unreadable but sharp. Something about her body language caught this attention. The woman took another breath, but now words came out. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. She swallowed hard, then treed again, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. President. Then suddenly she froze, her hands trembled, the microphone shook, her breathing became raw, but uneven. Ears darted around, as if searching for an escape. The energy in the room shifted. The moderator, sensing the awkwardness, was about to intervene, but before he could, Trump raised a hand without a trace of impatience or irritation. Trump tilted his head and said in a calm, measured voice, "You have every beautiful voice." By the way, the woman blinked, caught off guard. The entire room paused. The murmurs from the crowd stopped. The moderator, mid-emotion, hesitated. The camera zoomed in on Trump's face, showing not the usual bombastic businessman, not the roaring Raleigh leader, but a man who at this moment had chosen to diffuse a tense situation with an unexpected compliment. The woman let out a shaky exhale, and her vast laugh escaped her lips. Trump leaned slightly toward the microphone, his voice softer than usual. "Hey, don't panic. I'm right here with you." It was a moment that Noon had anticipated. Even the usual suspects, the journalists seated in the front rows, the ones who lived for moments where they could catch Trump off guard, were stunned into silence. Trump, the man painted as a ruthless, non-nonsense leader, was now acting as a reassuring figure. But was it genuine, or was this another strategic move? The woman, still visibly shaken, but now at least able to speak, finally managed to push through her nerve. She cleared her throat, though her voice still quivered. "Last year, I broke my neck." The audience gasped. It tried applying for assistance, but I was denied because I didn't make less than $700 a month. Trump's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes narrowed slightly. The woman continued, her voice growing stronger, her fears slowly being replaced with frustration. "I couldn't afford daycare. I had to go through physical therapy. I still have issues today. And I just want to know." She inhaled sharply, her voice tinged with desperation. "What realistic changes do you think can actually help parents like me?" And the nascence, the kind of silence that hangs in the air before something big happens. Trump sat back slightly. He tapped a finger against the table. His trademark moved when he was deep in thought. The glance toward the journalist, then back at the woman, then he smirked. And that was the moment, the exact moment that everyone knew something was coming. The silence lingered thick and heavy. The woman's words had hit the air like a thunderclap, and for a brief moment it felt as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting. Trump's smirk faded just slightly as she leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the table in rhythm with his thoughts. The camera zoomed in, capturing every movement, every flicker of expression. And then he finally spoke. "That's not fair," Trump said, shaking his head. His voice was steady, almost unusually calm for a man known for his fiery speeches. "That's not fair at all." The woman nodded quickly, as if desperate for someone to finally acknowledge her struggle. Trump continued, his gaze locked onto hers. "You never heard of Ankar?" A ripple of confusion swept through the audience. The woman blinked. What? Trump leaned back, exhaling sharply as she waved a hand in the air. "My daughter Ivanka drove me crazy over this." He smirked again, shaking his head as if recalling a personal battle. "You see, we had the simplest, most beautiful tax plan in the history of this country. We gave the biggest tax cuts, bigger than Reagan's, okay, bigger. And then Ivanka comes to him and she says, 'Dad, we need child tax credits for working moms.' And I said, 'Anka, we're cutting taxes, that's already helping.' But she wouldn't stop. She said, 'No, Dad, this is important.'" A few people chuckled in the audience. Trump's storytelling had a way of pulling people in, even those who didn't agree with him. He turned back to the woman. "So what happened?" "I listened to her, and guess what? We got it done. We increased child tax credits for parents like you. You probably didn't even hear about it, because you know fake news doesn't report the good stuff." The woman hesitated. "But that's not enough," she said, her voice is steadying. "It's still hard. Everything is more expensive. Now child care, food, rent, people like me are still drown." Trump nodded. "I get it. Look, inflation is out of control." And you know why? He pointed a finger toward the journalists sitting in the front row. "Because these people had gestured toward the press won't tell you who's actually responsible, the current administration. They're printing money like it's cash. They're spending like drunken sailors, and who suffers? Pu." A few people in the crowd clapped, others murmured. The woman's lips parted as if she wanted to push back, but she didn't. Trump's voice grew stronger. "When I was in office, we kept costs down. Urgy cheap gas with cheap groceries. You weren't paying what you're paying now, and do you know why? Because I understood business, because understood money. Allow voices suddenly cut through the room. Miss Trump, with all due respect, that's not answering the question. It was a journalist, a younger woman sitting near the front. Her expression was sharp, her pen poised over her notepad. What's your actual plan if you win again? How do you fix this? What do you tell people like her? Trump turned his head slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. He pointed at the journalist. You want to know the plan? She crossed her arms. Yes, Trump shrugged. Simple. West of the nonsense, west opt the out. Of control spending, west opt the stupid policies that are making everything worse. The journalist coughed. That's not Ariel plan. Trump grinned. It's a better plan than what we have now. Some in the audience laughed, others rolled their eyes. The woman, however, still wasn't done. But what about me? What about single mothers like me who are struggling right now? She pressed. Trump tilted his head. You know what? That's a great question. And I'm going to tell you something. Most politicians won't. The woman furrowed her brow. What Trump smirked. Government is never going to bet. Heens were murmur spread through the crowd. Trump gestured around the room. Do you really trust these people to fix your life? The same government that denied you assistance. The same politicians that say they care but never do anything. The woman opened her mouth. That Trump continued. You don't need more government handouts. You need opportunities. You need an economy where you can actually afford to live. And that's what I do. I don't just throw money at problems. It fixed the man. Another round of applause erupted from parts of the audience. The woman looked uncertain, and she wanted to believe him. She really did, but she had heard so many promises before. Trump leaned in, slightly lowering his voice, as if telling her a secret. You know what the difference is between me and them? She swallowed. What? Trump smirked. When I say I'll do something, I actually do it. The woman didn't say anything. She just stared at them, searching his face for any sign of deception. And that was when the camera zoomed in. The moment was frozen. A single mother struggling, a former president making a bold promise, the media waiting to spin the narrative, and America watching. But was it just another political performance? Or was Trump, for once, truly sincere? The answer was up for debate. For a moment there was silence. The woman, still clutching the microphone, seemed frozen in thought. She was processing Trump's words, weighing them against the frustration she had carried for years. Trump, on the other hand, was watching her carefully. He could sense it, the hesitation, the doubt. She wanted to believe him, but something was holding her back. And then, just as she opened her mouth to respond, a voice from the front. Row cut. And Miss Trump, let's be real here. You talk about cutting government assistance, but isn't it true that your tax cuts primarily benefited the wealthy? A murmur spread through the audience. The interruption had come from a young, eager-looking journal. Is the type who practically lived for moments like this. She leaned forward in her seat, their notepad clutched in one hand, a pen whirling between her fingers. Trump didn't react immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if considering his response. Then he smirked. Oh, look at this, a classic question from the fake news media. Some people in the audience laughed, others groaned. The journalist, however, remained unfazed. Sir, it's a legitimate question, she pressed. You're saying government isn't the solution, but many struggling Americans rely on it just to serve. What do you say to them? Trump leaned forward, his hands clasped together. His voice dropped slightly, making the room feel even smaller. I say this, do you really want to depend on the government to survive? The woman holding the microphone blinked. The journalist raised an eyebrow. Trump continued, his voice steady. Because let me tell you something, when the government controls your paycheck, your health care, your rent, guess what they control? You. A few gasps rippled through the room. Trump gestured broadly. These politicians, they want you to depend on them. Why? Because Seth, that means they get to tell you what to do, how to live, how to vote. But if you have a good job, if you can afford to take care of yourself, if you don't need them, then guess what? They lose power, and they hate that. The journalist narrowed her eyes. Sawyer, solutionisto, just what? Let struggling people fend for themselves. Trump shook his head. My solution is to build an economy where you don't have to struggle in the first place. He turned back to the woman with the microphone. Tell me, do you want another government check, or do you want aerial opportunity? She hesitated. I want to be able to provide for my family, of course. Trump nodded. Exactly, and that's what I did when I was president. We cut taxes for everyone, not just the rich like this one. He pointed to the journalist. Wants you to believe the journalist scoffed. That's simply not true. Trump raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you're saying middle-class Americans didn't see tax cut? The journalist opened her mouth, but hesitated. Trump grinned. See, that's what it hot. The crowd erupted into a mix of laughter and applause. The woman with the microphone, however, still wasn't satisfied. But what about now? She asked. Prices are skyrocketing. Families are struggling more than ever. If you become president again, what will you actually do to fix it? Trump's expression turned serious. First thing, we bring back American energy. Some Plainly the audience nodded. Trump continued under Megas was cheap. Why? Because we were energy independent. Now we're begging foreign countries for oil. It's insane we fix that prices start dropping overnight. The journalist folded her arms. And what about wages? What about housing? What about childcare costs? Trump sighed as if the answer was obvious. You bring back manufacturing jobs, you cut regulations that are strangling businesses, and you stop throwing money into useless government programs that drive up inflation. The journalist smirked. So your answer tist. Ruggling Americans is work harder. Trump laughed. No, sweetheart, my answer is work smarter. The crowd erupted. The journalist's smirk faded. The woman with the microphone, though, was still deep in thought. She wasn't as quick to react. As the others, she was processing. And then she asked something new and expected. Mr. Trump, do you actually care about people like me? The room fell silent. Trump stared there for a moment. The smirk was gone. Then finally he spoke. I care about this country. Then headed, and that means I care about the people in it. But let me tell you something, caring isn't about throwing money at a problem and hoping it goes away. It's about fixing the systems, so people like you don't have to beg you for help in the first place. The woman nodded slowly. The journalist opened her mouth to interject, but before she could, Trump raised a hand. Not enough talking, let's do something better. Let's ask the people. He turned to the audience. Who here would rather have more government checks? And who here would rather have lower prices, lower taxes, and more opportunities? A wave of applause erupted at these options. The journalist looked irritated. Woman with the microphone looked uncertain, and Trump just grinned, because he knew this debate wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The tension in the room had shifted. The audience wasn't just watching anymore. They were invested. Trump had managed to do what he did best, take a moment of uncertainty, flip the narrative, and make it his own. But the woman with the microphone still hadn't gotten the exact answer she was looking for, and neither had the press. The young journalist who had challenged Trump earlier wasn't done, yet she straightened in her seat, pen tapping impatiently against their notepad. Mr. Trump, she said, her voice is sharpie, you keep talking about cutting taxes and deregulating businesses, but that doesn't directly help people like her, single parents struggling. Families. How does giving billionaires a break on taxes help a mother who can't afford daycare? Trump exhaled through his nose. Here we go again. Head adjusted. His T looked directly at the journalist and then turned back to the woman. You know what I love about people like her? Trump asked, gesturing toward the journalist with a casual flick of his hand. The journalist frowned. Excuse me. Trump ignored her. They love throwing around words like billionaires and tax cuts, as if they're dirty things. But let me ask you this, who do you think creates the jobs in this country? The woman hesitated. Who do you think pays people so they can afford to live? Trump pressed. The woman opened her mouth, but Trump cut in before she could answer. It's businesses, it's companies, it's entrepreneurs. She tapped the table in front of him. For emphasis, if we overtax the people who actually create jobs, what do you think happens? The journalist crossed her arms. They can still afford it. Trump chuckled. Oh sure, and what do you think they'll do? When costs scoop, they pass it down to the workers, to the customers. Toyu, the woman seemed to be considering this. Look, Trump continued, if you make it easier for businesses to grow, they hire more people, they pay better wages, they expand, and that means parents like you, pointed at the woman, can actually choose where to work instead of just taking whatever job you can get. A small ripple of agreement could be heard in the audience, but the journalist wasn't backing down. That sounds nice in theory, she shot back, but wages have not kept up with inflation. People are working harder than ever and still falling behind. Shouldn't the government step in to balance the scales? Trump tilted his head. And how's that working out? Savard forward, resting his elbows on the table. Let me tell you something, he said, lowering his voice lightly. I've built businesses. I've seen how economies actually work. And the reality is when the government gets involved in things, it doesn't understand. It always makes things worse. The journalist coughed. That's a bro. Ad statement. Trump smirked. Ohaya, let's talk specifics. Let's talk about inflation. He pointed at the woman again. You said you can't afford daycare, right? Prices are insane. She nodded. Do you know why that is? She hesitated. Because costs are going up everywhere. Trump nodded. Exactly. And do you know why that is? She frowned, thinking Trump didn't wait. Because your government printed trillions of dollars in the last few years. More money flooding the economy makes everything more expensive. That's economics 101. They threw out cash like it was candy, and now you're paying the price. The journalist jumped in. But that was during the pandemic. People needed that assistance. Trump shrugged. Yeah, and now they need affordable living costs, but instead they got skyrocketing inflation. That's what happens when the government tries to fix things. It just creates new problems. The woman pursed her lips. She wasn't entirely convinced, but something about Trump's words made sense. Trump had her thinking. Now, let me ask you something, he said, his tone shifting slightly. Do you want another government check that barely covers the increase in prices? Or do you want prices to actually go down? The woman B. Linked, I want prices to go down. Trump smiled. Exactly. The journalist exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. That's an oversimplification of a complex economic issue. Trump spread his hands. Everything's complicated when you're a politician, but when you're a businessman, the answer is simple. Make America work again. Make America produce again. Make America strong again. A roar of approval erupted from parts of the audience. The journalist, now visibly irritated, raised, Mr. Trump, you keep talking about bringing jobs back, but what about people who can't just go? Itajab, what about disabled people, the elderly, the ones who need government assistance? Trump didn't hesitate. We take care of them. We'll always have, but the problem is we've been expanding dependency beyond those who actually need it. The journalist scoffed. So your plan is to cut programs and just hope the economy fixes itself. Trump shook his head. My plan is to create so much opportunity that fewer people need those programs in the first place. The woman with the microphone was quiet. Now her mind racing. Trump turned back to her. Look, I know you've had a tough time. And I get it, you don't trust politicians. You shouldn't, but I'm not a politician. I'm a businessman, and if there's one thing I know how to do, he smirked, it's how to turn things around. Another wave of applause. The journalist sat back here, expression unable. The woman finally spoke. I just want things to be easier. Trump nodded, and that's why I'm here. For the first time, she gave him a small hesitant smile. The camera zoomed in on her face, on her uncertainty, her hope, her lingering skepticism. And just like that, the debate had shifted, the energy in the room had shifted. Manansa, trembling with nerves, now looked at Trump with something different in here. Eyes, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was doubt, or maybe it was hope. Trump, sensing the moment, leaned back in his chair. He had said his piece. Now it was time to see if she had heard him. The journalist, still gripping her notepad, was less convinced. She had challenged him, ate every turn. But Trump had met her fire with fire. Still, she had one more card to play. She cleared her throat and sat up straight. Mr. Trump, she said, her tone measured. Let's strip away the politics for a second. Trump raised an eyebrow. That'll be a first. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. The journalist didn't smile. You've spoken a lot about policies, about tax cuts, about businesses, but I want to know something simpler. Trump nodded. Goon, she turned to the woman with the microphone. Ma'am, do you feel like you got aerial answer tonight? The woman hesitated. The room seemed to shrink around her. She looked down at the microphone in her hands, then up at Trump, met her gaze without flinching. Finally, she spoke. I think I got an answer, but I don't know if I believe it. A murmur spread through the crowd. Trump smiled slightly. That's fair, she swallowed, gathering her thoughts. I've struggled for so long. Every time it turn on the TV, I hear polity. CN say they'll fix things and nothing ever changes. Price keep rising, wages don't, and people like me, we just try to survive. She paused, exhaling shakily. I want to believe that you care. I want to believe that you mean what you say, but I've been burned before. Trump nodded. His expression had lost all traces of the smirk. The bravado he looked at there, the way a businessman looks at a deal he knows she can close, but only if he plays his cards right. Let me tell you something, he said. You're right not to trust politicians. You're right to be skeptical. You should be most of them, Arif. Ulofith gestured toward the journalist. These people, they get paid to make me look like a monster. And sometimes I help them. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The journalist cracked a small smile. Trump continued, but let me ask you something. When I was president, were things better for you? The woman hesitated. Trump pressed, did you pay less for gas? She nodded. Was your grocery bill lower? Another nodded. You feel like you had more opportunities? She bit her lip, then slowly she nodded. Trump spread his hands. Then that's your answer? The room was silent. The journalist shifted in her seat. With all due respect, Mr. Trump, that's not a guarantee that things will improve if you return to office. Trump shrugged. But it's a hell of a lot better than the guarantee you've got right now. Applause erupted. The woman with the microphone wasn't clapping. She was still staring at searching his face for any sign of insincerity. Then finally she smiled just a little. Trump smirked. Tough crowd laughter broke the tension. The moderator stepped forwards, signaling the end of the event. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have tonight. Let's thank President Trump and our audience for this discussion. More applauses. Some people cheered, others grumbled. The journalist scribbled a final note. Trump stood adjusting his tea. He turned back to the woman. What's your name? She blinked. Rachel. Trump nodded. Rachel, I don't expect you to believe me today, but if I get back in that office, you'll see. He patted her shoulder once, then turned to leave. The cameras follow him as she exited. But their moment wasn't with Trump anymore. It was with Rachel. She stood, the microphone still in hand, watching him walk away, and as the screen faded to black, the final question, Lynn Garrett, had Donald Trump just won her vote?